G'day there, I'm David Kranz. We've well and truly had the public discussion about refugees for a long time now. But privately, I'm intrigued by the quirky way that a bloke called Bilston flips between polarised perspectives on refugees. His work is quite confrontive. He's worth a look to review your own current view on refugees. Bilston likes quirky. For example, he penned his award-winning poem At the Intersection in a Venn diagram, would you believe? It's fun. It's worth a look sometime. But for now, let's flip through what he has to say about refugees. Literally. They have no need of our help. So do not tell me these haggard faces could belong to you or me should life have dealt a different hand. We need to see them for who they really are. Chances and scroungers, layabouts and loungers with bombs up their sleeves. Cutthroats and thieves. They are not welcome here. We should make them go back to where they came from. They cannot share our food, share our homes, share our countries. Instead, let us build a wall to keep them out. It is not okay to say, these are people just like us. A place should only belong to those who are born there. Do not be so stupid to think that the world can be looked at another way. Now, we've heard stuff like that before. We may agree with it or not. But here's the quirky bit. These very same lines read bottom up declare that the world can be looked at another way. Let's give it a flip. Have a listen. Do not be so stupid to think that a place should only belong to those who were born there. These are people just like us. It is not okay to say, build a wall to keep them out. Instead, let us share our countries, share our homes, share our food. They cannot go back to where they came from. We should make them welcome here. They are not cutthroats and thieves with bombs up their sleeves, layabouts and loungers, chances and scroungers. We need to see them for who they really are. Should life have dealt a different hand, these haggard faces could belong to you and me. So do not tell me they have no need of our help. The profiles here are poles apart. Our agreement or rejection of statements from either list is determined by our perceptions. Complex things, perceptions. They are influenced by the state of our emotions and by what goes on in our heads. Thoughts and feelings interact to effect subtle changes in the way we may see things at the time of each event. But fundamentally, the way we perceive the world has been shaped by our histories, coloured by specific experiences, honed by our adopted values, and expressed in our behaviour. Bilston's wordsmithing cleverly highlights how attitudes toward refugees are polarised worldwide. The theme in this direction aligns with ego-driven views that intend to self-protect at the expense of the refugees. The sentiments expressed in this direction profile compassionate perspectives that intend to benefit the refugees. The contrast is stark. These are spawned in love. These are driven by fear. Let's note that these approaches generalize and tend to apply across all facets of life. Whatever the issue, core perceptions influence the way we see things, influence all that we do, wherever we do it, for better or for worse. There are consequent outcomes. Fear separates. You're on your own. We get suspicious of others. What if this happens? What if X does Y? And so on. On the other hand, love bonds. Not just physically, emotionally, and maybe intellectually, but metaphysically. In those moments when we experience being part of the oneness of the universe. Let's explore our understanding of this oneness a bit deeper. We'll start with the philosophical notion, then point to the scientific evidence that both affirms that notion and extends our understanding of its significance. In the years following the devastation of World War I, Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, French philosopher, paleontologist and Jesuit priest, together with Edouard Leroy, French philosopher and mathematician, and Vladimir Merdansky, Russian mineralogist and geochemist, all wondered how the future would evolve. Together, they envisaged what they called the noosphere, a third evolutionary stage beyond the primary geosphere, that's rocks, water, air and the like, and beyond the second evolutionary stage, the biosphere, that is, all living things, both animal and vegetable. The noosphere is literally defined as mind sphere, a state of interconnected awareness between all minds. That includes their proposed planetary mind. Here's an artistic representation of planetary mind. It's planet Earth enfolded with mindful thoughts. That's not the kind of stuff that often gets talked about, but I draw attention to the idea of noosphere because de Chardin perceived it as embodying the victory of love over the forces of fear. Indeed, he considered that love is the affinity which links and draws together the elements of the world, and that love, in fact, is the agent of universal synthesis. If that's so, it follows that when relationships fracture, love is the glue to repair the damage. That notion sounds like a pretty good adhesive to patch up a rupturing world. And it's a notion that subsequent research supports in these references. But for now, I want to share a story about two unlikely elements of the world that were drawn together. Me and a sparrow. Here's the context. I took this picture from the northern end of this part of my garden. This gate gives access to a netted area to keep birds out. The net at this level guards my veggies, and at this level protects ripening apricots. Now don't ask me how, But every now and again, a bird gets in the net. When they do, it's a long job to get them out. We open the gate, but they never ever seem to see it. They mostly tend to instinctively fly upwards into a corner at the top and then flap in vain across all four corners. We hang about, and eventually the birds fly down to either rest or forage at ground level in the veggie patch, and we get the chance to shoo them out the gate to freedom. This can take up to an hour, or more even sometimes. We take the job seriously, especially since the day we came home to find a honey-eater that, we presumed, had died from exhaustion in attempting to get free. I subsequently decided to test out the one mind theory experientially. I figured that if my mind and the bird's mind are both nested in universal mind, then I should be able to communicate with the bird. I had a go. These are the words that I thought in my mind. I acknowledge that my mind and universal mind are the same mind. I said this to focus on my mission and to put my ego to bed. I then intentionally said in my head, "Bird, I want you to be free for your own sake. Fly downwards 6 feet or so, then head north. The gates open." And it happened within seconds. I felt a compassionate and contributive attitude towards that bird. I felt its joy at being freed. It was like my love quenched its fear. Furthermore, I had a repeat performance with another sparrow a couple of weeks later. Now, 2 out of 2 convinces me that Chardin and Co. were right, that love does oust fear and is the glue that bonds what might seem to be unlikely elements of the world. Let's add a new dimension to this previous list and perhaps call it our experience of the divine. For some folk, that's no more than one of those rare moments when they somehow sense that there is something bigger than them out there. It may be the awe experienced of a beautiful sunset, a perfumed garden, a wild sea, the hush of a forest, a newborn child, to name a few. These moments may be infrequent and brief, but they are indicators of the something whose true nature for them remains elusive and undefined. At another level, there are those who recognize that the something out there is benevolent. There are periodic experiences that, with hindsight, you might wonder about. For instance, regardless of what you might be doing at the time, quite out of the blue, you get the urge to ring someone who has just sprung to mind. Then out of the same blue, guess what? You and your someone might have smiled at the weird coincidence and then proceeded with a purposeful, timely, and productive chat. You may or may not have considered that both of you have had a prompt from universal mind. Let's bring forward the benevolent prompter and recognize that there are those whose faith assures them that the something out there is a loving God that not only prompts us, but is, indeed, the creative source of all that is, including us. Such faith recognizes an intimate relationship between the benevolent Creator and dependent humanity. The traditional expression of such faith is both hierarchical and dualistic. Simply put, for millennia, followers have seen their God as up there and prayed for God's blessing to manifest down here. Viewed graphically, if this represents God, then the traditional mindset sees us here, perceived as separate from God and each other. Our relationship with others tends to be competitive. Relatively recent scientific evidence highlights a critical difference that abandons this perceived duality of intimacy with God. Compare. Let this represent the creative source. It's a universal energy field that science calls consciousness. And here are the rest of us along with all creation. We relate to others as kin. Competition gives way to collaboration. We and our minds are seamlessly nested in the oneness of a self-aware universe. Such awareness abides in universal mind, so-called. Researcher Amit Goswami has dubbed such mind the mind of God. Author Larry Dossey details its magnitude. It's the one mind that hosts all minds. This is a radical shift from the traditional view. The very terminology might suggest that I am downgrading God or even perhaps trying to replace him as creator. Quite the opposite. Let's look at deep history and for now assume that all creation back then was as science describes it now. Our tribal ancestors experienced conscious connection with that something out there. They deified that something in their geographically and culturally constrained creation stories. Such gods were human constructions that, with ongoing modifications, have been useful metaphors for the divinity whose fullness remains beyond total comprehension. Science now writes another chapter to enhance the metaphor, to expand our comprehension by highlighting the oneness of a self-aware universe and by magnifying the collaborative roles for each of us in this sacred creative process. However, the cold fact is that most of the time, our awareness of this seamless communication channel and its utility is masked by our preoccupation with egotistical pursuits. It's always there, we just don't see it. We can tune back in by simply intending to do so. You may recall that I chose to acknowledge that linkage to universal mind before attempting to communicate with those sparrows. Now, there's a further comparison still to be made. With this traditional mindset, we're either left to our own devices, or we pray to God to address X, Y, and Z, and add the proviso, Lord, in your mercy, hear our prayer. God hears all right, but many of us tend to leave the outcome to God, as we've tended to do with our prayers for peace on earth that have gathered dust in the pending basket for millennia. With this mindset, humanity can not only see the need to figure out the A, B, and C in order to deal with X, Y, Z, but can, with a bit of practice, put ego to bed. Tune in to Universal Network. Get a brief on the job. Download the How to Do It's. Get updates when necessary to clarify uncertainties so that they can then collaborate, get on with the job. They've figured out that the process is safe because Universal Mind only shares information that is beneficial, that is loving and truthful. All else is rejected as illusion. Now one can imagine that along the way, tuned-in workers will hear a voice on the network say something like this. Thanks, guys. You're really getting the hang of the way progress is intended to evolve. You're loving for peace that is still in the pending basket.